I actually think another really good option would be Alchemy, which can sort of just like create frosting as its power, which sounds really strange if you've never seen it. Trust me, it makes sense in the context of the game. How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to BridgeFour Games. In case you didn't know, my name is Blaine, and I'm a Pokemon expert. I thought it'd be fun to sit down today and answer your questions about the Pokemon franchise to hopefully clear up some of these mysteries that you guys have been wondering about. Make sure you guys like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, but other than that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so first up, looks like we have a pretty easy one here. Who would win in a fight between every Pokemon ever created? And, in case you guys couldn't tell, that was sarcasm. Alright, so in a fight between all the Pokemon ever created, I assume you mean like a giant melee battle? Obviously, some of the really overpowered Pokemon, like Primal Groudon or Primal Kyogre, would do pretty well. And a lot of people would probably opt for Arceus because it is the god of the Pokemon world, which I think is pretty solid. But you know what? I think I'm gonna go ahead and vote for Marshadow. It's a fighting ghost mythical Pokemon back from Sun and Moon. It's very unique because of its typing. It's able to actually have a neutral attack on basically any Pokemon in the entire game, so it can never really be stopped by anything. Now, it can be taken out, but it can do a lot of damage, so I think it would actually do pretty good in a fight like that. And it also has a move where it can steal the sort of power-ups from other Pokemon, so I think that would probably give it a really big edge. Alright, for our next question here, we have, what was the inspiration behind creating Pokemon? What a fantastic question, because, you know, Pokemon games are very fantastical and have a lot of elements to them, so a lot of people don't really know that it starts with kind of humble beginnings. So Pokemon was actually created by a guy named Satoshi Tajiri. This is his autobiography, where he actually talks about his entire inspiration behind creating the game. So Satoshi Tajiri loved actually going out and doing bug catching as a kid. He loved getting little containers and catching ladybugs, you know, ants, whatever. And he thought that'd be really cool to have a game sort of based around that. Now, on top of that, as they were kind of coming up with the idea for this game, they were playing this game in Japan, Dragon Quest II, and that actually had a feature in it where you could trade items between games. So they thought it'd be really cool to have an option in the game where you could sort of trade with the other games to get all the Pokemon you needed to get. And you could use that to like evolve or have certain, you know, specific Pokemon in each game. And that's how we got sort of the dual version and trading mechanics that we have today. And on top of that, a lot of people don't know that actually the whole catching mechanic of using Pokeballs to catch Pokemon, yeah, that actually came from the Japanese series Ultraman. Now, Ultraman's actually a tokusatsu show. It just means like a lot of special effects. It's kind of in the same family as something like Super Sentai, which is better known over here in the US as Power Rangers. But in Ultraman, they would actually catch their sort of monsters of the week in little capsules. And that's actually where they came up with the idea to catch Pokemon in Pokeballs. And that's actually why the original name for Pokemon was actually Pocket Monsters, but before that, it was actually Capsule Monsters. So there you go, bug catching, Dragon Quest II, and Ultraman. What are some Pokemon with no weaknesses? That is a great question, and actually the answer as of today is that currently there are none. Now, before Gen 6, before we had the Fairy type, Spiritomb was a Pokemon that had no weaknesses just because as a Ghost and Dark type Pokemon, nothing could actually do super effective damage to it. But once we got the Fairy typing, that actually did add a weakness to it, so now it's only weak to Fairy. So in terms of just the organic typing of every single Pokemon, there are none that have no weaknesses. But it's also really cool that we got this question when we did, because as of Scarlet and Violet, sort of the current Pokemon games that are out right now, we do have the Terastallize mechanic, which allows us to change types. So you can get some kind of silly things going on with different abilities. For example, if you have a Pokemon with Levitate, you can Terastallize it to make it into an electric type Pokemon, which is going to be weak to only ground. And if it is Levitate, obviously it's going to be immune to ground. So it's not really no weaknesses, but it's close enough. Now, next up, Samuya asks, what's the strongest Pokemon that's not a legendary? That's a really fantastic question, and it's actually one that's kind of tricky to answer because it's very subjective. The term strongest can mean kind of a lot of different things, so it really depends on how you interpret it. So obviously things like our pseudo-legendary Pokemon that just have the highest base stats, so they can do a lot of damage, take a lot of hits, those are obviously going to be on the list. So things like Dragonite, Salamence, Tyranitar, all of them are just going to be awesome choices, but again, for me, I don't really consider them to be the absolute strongest. So right now, some of the Paradox Pokemon are obscenely strong, and they're actually stronger than some legendaries. Things like Fluttermane and Roaring Moon are incredibly powerful and can do a lot of damage even though they are not legendary. But for me, when I think of a Pokemon in terms of its strength, I tend to think of how it affects the team that you have and what Pokemon can work best with like the most amount of Pokemon, because that way you can use it, it's going to be good, and then it gives you the most amount of versatility when you're trying to build out the rest of your team. And for that, you know, everybody's going to hate me and everybody's going to rag on me for this, but I'm going to go ahead and 100% say Incineroar. It can make your opponent's Pokemon weaker, it can do a ton of damage, and that can actually just hit their Pokemon and switch out. It's just so good. So that would probably be my vote, with a regrettably honorable mention going to Goldengo, because that Pokemon is just crazy. Alright, Andrew asks, what Pokemon is the most intelligent and why? So Pokemon intelligence is kind of something that's a little complicated because we get a lot of sort of one-off Pokedex entries talking about how smart Pokemon are, even though we don't really see a lot of evidence of that in the games because it doesn't really affect like battling or anything like that. So it's mentioned a lot how things like Reuniclus and Slowking are very intelligent just because, like, Reuniclus is basically a brain and then Slowking has the Shelter of Knowledge on its head. So both of these Pokemon are very smart, but the two leaders, in my opinion, number 2 is going to be probably Metagross. Metagross does have, for each of its legs, each one's a brain, because each one is basically an independent Beldum. The issue, though, is that Metagross is widely considered to kind of think like a computer. So it's very, very intelligent and can process pretty much whatever, you know, sort of equation you feed into it. But in terms of what Pokemon I think is the smartest overall, I'm going to go ahead and just go with Alakazam. It's said in like almost all of its Pokedex entries that it has a ridiculously high IQ. Plus it has incredible psychic powers, and I believe it can read minds. So it should be able to pretty much just gather any information it doesn't have already. So yeah, this thing is definitely going to win the most smartest award, like hands down. Prate asks, why are Pokemon games so famous throughout the world? And what I ultimately think is the real answer is that Pokemon is a game where, because of the creatures, they don't necessarily have personalities of their own, like they do in the anime and things like that, but you sort of have to imprint, you know, emotions and personalities that you feel like they would have on them, and then you sort of receive the Pokemon based on how you kind of see them. Now, what this basically means is that everybody can have a unique connection with just kind of this blank slate monster that they see, and really can develop kind of a really close bond with them, which is why so many people are such big fans of different Pokemon and are really diehards about them. And then on top of that, the franchise has grown and evolved in such a way that you can really sort of enjoy it any way you want. You can play the main series games. You know, like here I have Pokemon Red. If you love playing Pokemon Red, you can go ahead and do that. Or you can play the Pokemon trading card game. Or you can play Pokemon Go, you know, or you can just collect, you know, plushies and figures like that. I mean, honestly, there's so many different ways to enjoy the franchise, and there's so many characters that people love, that ultimately it's just such an open experience where everybody's going to find something they love about it. And a lot of people tend to just go ahead and try it out, and this results in pretty much everybody having heard about it at least some point in their life. All right, next up we have Kevin, who asks, what Pokemon would be most beneficial to the world if it really existed? I would probably say any Pokemon that can do healing abilities, so something like a Dino or a Chansey, Blissey, or even a lot of the Psychic type Pokemon. I think any Pokemon that could do Heal Pulse, definitely they are going to be a really strong contender, because being able to heal a lot of the diseases we don't have cures for, or things like that, would be hugely beneficial to humanity. I think that would be awesome. I actually think another really good option would be Alchemy, which can sort of just like create frosting as its power, which sounds really strange if you've never seen it. Trust me, it makes sense in the context of the game, but I think that would be able to kind of end world hunger. I mean, it wouldn't be the most substantial food ever, but it would definitely get, you know, calories to people who need it. And on top of that, I think pretty much any grass type Pokemon could summon vines and create like vegetables. So being able to really just end world hunger pretty much just that quickly, I think would be something else that'd be really, really helpful. All right, next up we have a really nice lighthearted one, and it says, how do Pokemon die? Well, as far as we know, Pokemon die like kind of everything else does. We know the Pokemon can either age to a point where they can no longer stay alive, or they can sustain injuries that are so serious if it's not treated, they will end up passing away. Now, obviously, Pokemon doesn't come out and just say this. You kind of have to pick it up from different sort of clues in the anime and the video games. But as far as I can tell, kind of one of two things happen when Pokemon do pass away. Its spirit, its life force, passes on to the other side and either, you know, goes to whatever the Pokemon afterlife is, or it becomes a ghost, becomes something like Ghastly or Haunter. But another thing that actually can happen, we actually saw this in the Pokemon Sun and Moon anime, when Ash had his Litten before he actually caught it. It was really good friends with a very old Stoutland who did actually pass away. It's an incredibly sad part of the anime and really is kind of a tearjerker. But we see that Stoutland doesn't really leave a body behind. It sort of just disappears, kind of like in Star Wars with like Yoda. I guess it sort of just disappears and becomes kind of one with the universe. So I don't really know what it takes to get to that point where you can sort of ascend at the point of death, but I suppose that's something some Pokemon can do if they're that connected with whatever the Pokemon universe is. And keeping up with the very cheery themes here, we have another question that says, what is the scariest Pokemon in your opinion? Mr. Mime and Jinx. Next. Yeah, but like seriously, I think Parasect is pretty high on that list because, again, the big old mushroom on its back is doing all the thinking. Like the actual like Parasect body that it grew from, you know, really is not there anymore. Like the brain is pretty much gone. That's why it doesn't have pupils, because the mushroom is in charge. And the reason I think that's really terrifying to me, you know, there's a lot of fungus that really do exist in the real world that do this to bugs, but specifically in the Pokemon world, because when Pokemon lay eggs, they hatch and then they're right next to their parents usually. Every single Paras that ever exists is going to be infected by those mushrooms too, which is really creepy because as a species, they can never get to a point where they're not going to have that problem, which means every single member of their species at some point is just going to become a meat puppet to like a giant, scary, terrifying mushroom on its back, which I think the concept of that ever happening to a sentient species is just absolutely horrifying. And on top of that, another really good one is Drifloon. It's like a ghost Pokemon, looks like a balloon. It looks like a balloon, so like little kids will like it, and then it'll grab the strings on it, and then it'll pull the kids away and take them, I don't know, wherever it wants to take them for whatever purpose. And that is also absolutely horrifying, and I'm amazed Game Freak had kind of the guts to put something like that in the game, but here we are. All right, man, y'all have some really deep questions today, because the next person asks, which Pokemon would be best for eating? Great question. I would probably have to go with any number of water Pokemon that can be found like sort of throughout the regions. So something like, we know Magikarp doesn't have a lot of meat on it, so that's probably not a very good choice. But I would have to say something like Tentacool. Obviously, calamari is a very well-known and tasty food that's actually very good for you. So the fact that the oceans are typically just absolutely teeming with them means you could probably harvest quite a lot of them and not really cause a lot of ecological impact, which I think would be fantastic. Plus, at the same time, you'd be making the waters a lot safer for travelers just passing through. So that's probably my choice. Anime at the same time, I'd probably have to go ahead and throw out Krabby and Miltank because, heck, I mean, Surf and Turf is delicious, right? And next up, we have Ashley, who asks, how did Pokemon Go become such a massive hit so fast? And you know, this is another really good one, and I think it's kind of one of those situations where the framework of how Pokemon exists really made it become such a big hit. So Pokemon, again, we talked about how it really can appeal to everybody just based on all the designs and things like that, but at the end of the day, it's also a game based on collecting, and because of that, the sort of framework that existed from the game Ingress that Niantic had before really just sort of worked perfectly with Pokemon, because as a collecting game, it's already about going to a location and catching a Pokemon, and just sort of skinning that on top of the sort of geocaching mold worked fantastically for them and really kind of tied into this already existing amazing framework they had. But on top of that, the marketing was really good. A lot of people were very excited about it. And on top of that, this also came out at a time when Pokemon games were starting to get kind of expensive and starting to become something that people were looking at through a very nostalgic lens. So it really became just this great opportunity for a lot of people to buy into Pokemon again without having to buy any old systems, any old games. They could literally just pick up their phone and start playing. But really, I think the best answer is they had a fantastic launch window in mid-July. People want to be outside. We have very long days that are going to be ending very late. And as soon as they dropped it, people were outside because people want reasons to go outside and have fun. And they were using their phones to be able to catch these Pokemon. And when you combine that with sort of the natural nostalgia that Pokemon has, it became a very impressive force. And that's why, because of the level of Pokemon, even though Niantic has had so many problems over the years just getting Pokemon Go to work perfectly, people still love the game just because it blends all those things together just flawlessly. Next up, we have Jacob, who actually asks, which Pokemon evolutions make their Pokemon worse? I think really any Pokemon that can abuse the item Eviolite is going to be pretty much the best candidate for this answer. Eviolite is a held item that when a Pokemon holds it, if they're not fully evolved, they get a 50% boost to their defense and special defense. So two really fantastic examples. Chansey is a lot stronger than Blissey, because with Eviolite, it actually can take a lot more hits than Blissey can. Another really good example is Rhydon. So Rhydon actually evolves into Rhyperior, and Rhyperior is a fantastic Pokemon, don't get me wrong, but the issue with it is, its attack and defense stats aren't that much better than just Rhydon's. So Rhydon can gain an obscene amount of bulk by having Eviolite. So really, Rhyperior is almost always going to be the wrong option to go with, except in Sword and Shield where you're able to give weakness policy to it and give it a lot of boosts that way. But being able to abuse Eviolite is really one of the best reasons for a Pokemon evolution being bad. And I don't know, last but not least, I'd probably have to say Shellos because I absolutely despise Gastrodon. If all the Pokemon regions went to war, which one would win? That's a pretty tough one, I have to say, but I think we can cross off some of the contenders. So first off, I don't think Gens 1, 2, or 3 are going to get there. I don't think they have the firepower or a lot of the sort of organic sort of weapons that would be needed, so I'm going to set those aside. I also don't think the Alola region is going to get there either, so let's set that aside. So that leaves us with Gen 4, so the Sinnoh region, and then I have the Kalos region, Galar, and of course, I also have the Paldea region and Scarlet and Violet. So here's how I see it. I think Paldea would put up a very good fight because it's very heavily fortified. It has a lot of watchtowers and stuff, meaning they have a very militaristic past. So I think they would put up a good fight, but I don't think they would win. So I'm going to give that number 4. I think after that, Galar would probably do pretty well because of all the Gigantamax Pokemon. Like, if you guys have ever watched Attack on Titan, when Marley is doing any sort of war against another country, it has all these military strategies based on using Titans. So if you take sort of that concept and apply it to Galar, I think that would 100% work and probably be pretty devastating. But I think number 1 and 2 are probably going to be Kalos and then Sinnoh. I think Kalos because they do have the weapon AZ used. And I mean, like, it could probably be rebuilt, right? It doesn't have to. I mean, we did destroy it, but like all the pieces are still there. Like that could be rebuilt, no problem. So they literally have a, doomsday device in this country, in this region. And I think they could definitely fire that up and start wreaking some real havoc. But ultimately, I think Sinnoh is going to win just because they literally have the god of the Pokemon world and all its creations in there. Like, if you lose, just get Dialga to reset time, and guess what? You're back to square one. You can come up with a different strategy. And, I mean, Arceus, assuming it can assume its natural form or became like a real god, just like, game over. So yeah, I mean, Sinnoh. It's got to be Sinnoh, hands down, with, Kalos coming in a close second. And last up here, we have Percy, who asks, what are some of the Pokemon fan-made games that you absolutely must play? Oh boy, this is actually a really fun one because there are a lot of Pokemon fan-made games that actually do offer quite a lot and actually do really expand on the franchise in fun ways. A really fun one I have right here is Pokemon Snakewood. So this actually is a game that it takes place in kind of like a post-apocalyptic like sort of wasteland world where there are zombies. And a lot of times you can catch like zombified versions of Pokemon. So like instead of Snorlax, there's Gorlax. And sometimes when you beat up like youngster Joey and you defeat him, that means you actually ended his life and he will come back as a zombie later on in the game. It's just a lot of fun. It's a very cool concept for a game. And it's kind of a unique way to approach sort of this concept. Another one I'll have to say is Pokemon Dark Rising. This doesn't really have any sort of really interesting kind of unique story going for it. But what I do like, for one, I love Dragon Pokemon, and all three of your starters here are dragons, which I think is really, really kind of cool because they can be very difficult to train up from a low level, and that kind of adds some more, just natural challenge to the game, which I think is really cool. But also Pokemon can go well over level 100 in the game. They can go to like 150, things like that. And having to level up, having to grind up to those levels is very, very challenging and really makes for a much more sort of interesting and compelling game. And speaking of hardness, another really good one is Pokemon Radical Red. It's actually a ROM hack of Pokemon Fire Red, and basically it's just like all the AI, all the, difficulty is turned up to 11. And all the Pokemon, I believe, through the end of Sword and Shield are in the game. So they have like Regieleki, Regidrago are in there. It's very fun. A lot of Pokemon YouTubers did it. I actually had a playthrough of it early, and I almost never got past Brock because it was just that hard. I highly recommend you guys go try that out. Like, all the trainers have competitively trained up teams, and it's just a lot of fun to mess around with. Another couple other ones are Pokemon Uranium and Pokemon Clover. Both of those are entirely fan-made games that take place in their very own regions, and they're really just a lot of fun to kind of see all the fan-made Pokemon and see their unique designs. A lot of them really do a very good artwork that does look very similar to kind of the real Pokemon style, so I would go check those out. They're a lot of fun. Alright, there you have it, everybody. Your Pokemon questions answered. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it. If you guys want to see a part 2, I have a lot more Pokemon questions that people have asked me, and I'll be happy to answer them, but let me know in the comments if you want to see it. That being said, everybody, thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out with me. If you did enjoy the video, please make sure that you absolutely Giga Impact that like button in the face. And of course, consider subscribing because it really does help us out. And you'll make sure you never miss any of our awesome videos just like this one. So that being said, everybody, I've been Blaine for BridgeFour Games. Thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out with me. Remember that the best Pokemon games are the ones that you love to play, and the proper ways to play them are however you have the most fun. And as always, I hope each and every one of you have a happy, epic, awesome, and amazing day. And I'll see you in the next video. See you around. Bye-bye.